Nurses or doctors, who was the patient that you will never forget? I worked as an ICU nurse at a hospital that took the sickest patients in the region. Level 1 trauma center, transplant cases, the kind of unit where you learn very quickly how to separate your work from the rest of your life. I was good at it. I had been there long enough that death didn't follow me home anymore. I could lose a patient at 6 in the morning, drive home, eat breakfast, and sleep without thinking about it. That sounds cold, but it's the only way to survive in that job. You process it, you file it away, and you show up for your next shift. Not one of them stayed with me past the parking lot. Then we got Kieran. He came in on a Sunday night after a weekend of heavy drinking with friends. He was 28. He had a stomach bleed, which was serious, but very treatable. When they brought him up from the ER, he already had a breathing tube in, but that was just to protect his airway. It wasn't because his lungs were failing. Every doctor who saw him expected this guy to get better. Young, no major health history, just a bad weekend that went too far. His friends had brought him in, 2 guys around his age who sat in the waiting room for hours asking questions and bringing him things even though he was sedated and couldn't use any of it. No family came. His friends said his parents lived out of state and that things were complicated. They didn't explain what that meant. I took care of Kieran for 3 shifts that first week. Each shift I expected to see improvement. Each shift there was none. His labs kept getting worse in ways that didn't match what was wrong with him. The stomach bleed was under control, but his liver numbers started climbing on day 3, and by day 5 they were in a range I had only seen in patients who were actively dying. The attending couldn't explain it. They ran every test they could think of. Nothing pointed to a reason. His liver was just shutting down and nobody knew why. I kept checking on him more than I needed to. I would finish charting on my other patients and go back into his room and stand there looking at the monitor. His numbers were wrong. Everything about his trajectory was wrong. He should have been extubated and eating solid food by now. Instead, he was on 3 pressors and his skin was turning yellow. By the end of the 2nd week, Kieran's liver had completely failed. The transplant team evaluated him and said he wasn't a candidate. Too much damage and no clear cause, which meant they couldn't guarantee a new liver wouldn't fail the same way. His friends stopped coming around day 10. I don't blame them. His mother finally called on day 12. She spoke to the attending for about 15 minutes. Afterward, the attending told us the family wanted to transition to comfort care. They were not coming to the hospital. They authorized everything over the phone. I was working the night they made the decision. We turned off the pressors and removed the monitors, and I sat with Kieran while his body did what it had been trying to do for days. He bled a lot. We kept him comfortable, and I held his hand even though he couldn't feel it. He died at 7 a.m. exactly when my shift ended. I clocked out, walked to my car, and drove home. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was sad. I had handled sad before. This was different. Something about Kieran's case felt unfinished. I kept going over his chart in my head. The unexplained liver failure. The family who never showed up. The phone call where his mother agreed to let him die without getting on a plane. For the next 3 weeks, I thought about him almost every day. Not dramatic, weepy thinking. Just this low, steady hum in the back of my brain that wouldn't quit. Then one night, about a month after he died, I had a dream. I was in the ICU. Everything looked exactly right, down to the placement of the hand sanitizer dispensers on the walls. The landline at the nurse's station rang. I picked it up. It was Kieran. I knew his voice immediately, even though I had never heard him speak. He had been intubated and sedated the entire time I cared for him. But in the dream, I knew exactly who it was. I said, "How are you calling me? You died." He said he had his ways. I started asking questions about his liver and what happened and why his family didn't come. He cut me off. He said, "That's not why I'm calling." I woke up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding. For the first time in years, I didn't try to file a patient away. I pulled out my phone and started writing down everything I could remember. The friends' names from the visitor log, the area code his mother called from, the timeline of his decline. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew the answer wasn't in his chart. It was in the people who walked away from him. My next shift was 2 days later. The unit was quiet, only 4 patients, and sometime around 2 a.m. I went to the back workstation and pulled up Kieran's chart. I read the whole thing from the beginning. Every note, every lab result, every order. I read it like I was looking for a crack in a wall, and I found one. There was a social work note buried on day 4 that I had never read. It had a single line that stopped me cold. The social worker had written that Kieran's friend Nicholas had come to her office and asked whether the hospital could contact Kieran's mother directly. Nicholas told her she won't come if he's the one asking. I read that line 5 or 6 times. It meant Nicholas already knew, before Kieran was a week into his stay, that his mother was choosing not to come. It wasn't that she didn't know he was sick. It was that she wouldn't come for him. There's a big difference. I wrote down Nicholas's phone number from the visitor log. I finished my shift, gave report, and walked out to the parking lot. I sat in my car with the engine off and called him. It rang 4 times, and then he picked up. He didn't say hello. There was a long pause, and then he said, "I was wondering if someone from that hospital would ever call." His voice was flat and tired. I told him I had been one of Kieran's nurses, and that I was with him at the end. Then I asked about the drinking. Nicholas said Kieran wasn't just a weekend drinker. I need you to understand that. He had been sober for almost 2 years. Real sober. Going to meetings, got a sponsor, the whole thing. He said the weekend they brought him in was a relapse. Not a night out that went too far. A full collapse after 2 years clean. Nicholas and his friend Arnie had gone to check on Kieran that Sunday morning because he hadn't answered his phone since Friday night. They found him on the floor of his apartment, unconscious, surrounded by bottles. 2 years sober. He had been fighting and winning, and then something knocked him down. I asked what made him relapse. He got quiet. Then he said his mom had a rule. She told Kieran that his sobriety was the deal. If he stayed sober, she would stay in his life. If he ever drank again, she was done. Those were her exact words. Done. Nicholas called Na on day 2 of Kieran's stay. Told her what happened. Na asked one question. Was he drinking? Nicholas said yes, and Na hung up. Her son was on a ventilator, and she hung up because the answer was wrong. I asked why Kieran relapsed after 2 years. Nicholas went quiet. Then he said he got a letter from his mom. I don't know what it said, but he read it and he was different after. That was a Thursday. By Saturday, he was drinking again. Whatever she wrote was bad enough to undo 2 years in 48 hours. I wanted to ask more, but Nicholas was running out of whatever had carried him this far. So I asked one more thing. Why he and Arnie stopped coming. His voice cracked on the first word and he had to start over. Arnie couldn't handle it, he said. Said Kieran looked like he was already gone by day 8. Like his body was still there, but he wasn't. And I kept coming, but every time I walked in that room, I just thought, his own mother won't come. What am I even doing here? He stopped talking for a second, trying to hold it together. That's the worst thought I've ever had, he said, and I'll carry it forever. He hung up without saying goodbye. I had been treating this like a medical mystery. The unexplained liver failure, the labs that didn't make sense, the trajectory that defied every expectation. But this wasn't a medical mystery. It never was. Kieran's liver failed because a 28-year-old man who had been sober for 2 years got a letter from his mother that broke something in him, and he drank until his body gave out. The mystery wasn't in his blood work. It was in his family. I had Na's number from the hospital records. I wasn't supposed to use it for this, but Kieran died in my hands with nobody in the room who loved him, and I decided that mattered more than protocol. I called her on my next day off. It rang twice, and a woman answered, sharp and guarded, and the first thing she said was, "Is this about the bill?" I told her no. I told her I was a nurse at the hospital where her son had been a patient, that I was one of the people who took care of him. Long silence. Then Na said, "I don't know what you want from me." Guarded, like she had built the wall before she even picked up the phone. I told her I was with Kieran at the end. I held his hand while he died. I said I had never had a patient stay with me the way he did, and I couldn't stop thinking about why nobody in his family was there. Her voice got hard. She said, "You don't know anything about my family. You knew my son for 2 weeks. I knew him for 28 years. You don't get to call me and make me the villain of some sad story you're telling yourself." Something in that landed. Part of me knew she had a point. I kept my voice calm. I said, "I'm not calling to judge you. I'm calling because your son died alone and I can't understand it." It came back fast. He wasn't alone. You just said you were there. So what do you actually want? You want me to say I regret it so you can feel better about whatever this is? I took a breath and said, "I know about the letter." The line went completely silent. Not the silence from before, where she was deciding whether to talk. This was the sound of someone getting hit with something they didn't see coming. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. I pulled the phone from my face and checked the call was still going. It was. Then Na said very quietly, "Who told you about that?" I said, "Nicholas." She let out a long, shaky breath. Then she said, "That letter was not what you think. It was a wedding invitation. Her stepchild was getting married, and the family sent out invitations. But the one she sent Kieran didn't actually invite him. She put the invitation in the envelope so he would know about the wedding, and then she wrote a note on the back that it would be better if he didn't come. People would ask questions, and it would be easier for everyone." I sat there and felt the room tilt. I had pictured something cruel. This was worse. This was casual. His own mother sending him proof that she had built a whole new family, and he wasn't part of it, not because he was drinking. At that point, he had been sober for almost 2 years. He was going to meetings, staying clean, putting in the work, and she still didn't want him there because people would ask questions. His existence was a problem to be managed, a loose end to be tucked away. He read that note and understood exactly what it meant. 2 years of sobriety, and she still saw him as someone to keep away, because he was inconvenient. And then he drank. Something that had been holding on for 2 years just let go. After Na told me about the letter, she sealed back up and stopped answering my calls. 4 calls over the following week. No answer, no callback. I was stuck with half a story and no way to get the rest. At work, I started making small mistakes. Nothing dangerous, but things I never used to do. Forgetting to chart a med on time, losing my train of thought in the middle of giving a report, standing at a bedside staring at a pump for 30 seconds without reading the number. My body was at work, but my brain was somewhere else. Jezebel noticed before anyone else did. She was the only person at work I was actually close with. She caught me after a shift in the break room, jacket still on, staring at my locker. She sat down and said, "You're not sleeping. What's going on?" Something about the way she waited pulled the truth out of me. I told her everything. Kieran, the dream, Nicholas, Na, the letter, the 4 calls with no answer. When I was done, she said, "I need to ask you something. Are you doing this for him or for you?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. She told me about a patient she'd had years ago. Young woman, no family, nobody came. She died and Jezebel spent months tracking down the family. And when she finally got her answers, it didn't fix anything. The knowing didn't make it stop. It just gave me a different thing to carry. "I'm not telling you to stop," she said, "but be ready for that. The hole doesn't close just because you fill it with information." I decided to stop, not dramatically. I just decided I wasn't going to call Na anymore. I made it 1 week, 7 days of working my shifts, driving home, eating dinner, going to bed, and every single night when I closed my eyes, I was back in that ICU at the nurse's station with the phone in my hand, that old landline sound, loud and sharp. I would pick up and Kieran would be there, and every time he would say, "That's not why I'm calling." 7 nights, same dream, same words, same place where it cut off. By Friday, I was a mess. I was sitting on my couch around 9 p.m., not watching anything, just existing in that gray space between awake and something else. My phone buzzed on the cushion next to me, a number I didn't have saved. I almost swiped it away, but I opened it. It said, "This is Na. I found the letter he sent me. I haven't opened it yet. I don't think I can do it by myself." I read it 3 times. Na had the letter. Kieran's letter. The one Nicholas told me about. The one Kieran sent before the drinking weekend. The one she never opened. She was reaching out to the nurse who held her son's hand while he died, because I was the only person left who hadn't agreed to pretend he didn't exist. I called her back that same night. We agreed to do it over the phone. She would open it, I would be on the line, but before we got to the letter, Na needed to talk. I could feel it, this pressure behind her voice, so I let her. She said she and Kieran's father split when Kieran was 9. She got custody. She said she resented it. Not Kieran specifically, but the situation. She was alone, raising a kid who reminded her every day of a marriage that failed, and she never figured out how to separate the love from the anger. She remarried when Kieran was 14, to a man who had no interest in being a stepfather, and never pretended otherwise. Kieran started drinking at 16. By 20, he was in and out of 30-day programs. Na said, every time he got sober, I would let myself hope. And every time he relapsed, it was like losing him all over again. At some point, I decided it was easier to just lose him once and be done with it. She told me the wedding invitation was her husband's idea. He said Kieran would make a scene or show up drunk or embarrass them, and she went along with it because it was easier than fighting. It was always easier to go along with it. Then she told me about the airport. Day 6 of Kieran's stay. Na said she woke up that morning and something broke open in her. She packed a bag, drove to the airport, bought a ticket, went through security. She was at the gate when she called her husband. He said, "What are you going to do when you get there? Watch him die? You already lost him years ago." She sat there for a full hour, watched 2 flights board and leave. Then she picked up her bag and walked back to her car. "I drove home," she said. "I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I haven't really slept since. I had gone in looking for a cold woman who walked away without looking back." That's not who was on the other end of this call. The woman I was talking to hadn't slept since the day she turned around at that gate. Every time she got close to reaching out, her husband was there with a reason not to. He made giving up on Kieran feel like the reasonable thing, the healthy thing. And Na, who had spent her whole life taking the path that cost least in the moment, listened. She let someone else make the hard choice. Now her son was dead, and the only person she could call was a nurse she had never met. I heard her take a deep breath on the other end of the line, the kind you take before you do something you can't undo. She said, "I'm ready." I said, "Okay." I heard the sound of paper tearing, quiet but clear through the phone. Then nothing. Complete silence. Just her breathing. 1 minute passed, then 2. I didn't rush her. I didn't ask what it said. I just stayed on the line. Then Na made a sound I have never heard before, and don't think I will ever hear again. It wasn't crying. I know crying. I have heard more crying than most people hear in a lifetime. This wasn't that. It was this low, broken sound that started in her chest and came out of her mouth like something being torn in half very slowly. Like grief and regret and horror all arrived at once, and her body didn't know which one to express, so it made this raw, awful noise that was all of them at the same time. She tried to say something. I heard a word start to form, and then it collapsed into that sound again. She tried twice more. Finally, her breathing steadied just enough, and she started reading the letter out loud. Kieran wrote it 3 days before the weekend he started drinking. It was short, maybe 6 or 7 sentences. No long explanation, no anger, no list of everything she had done wrong. He wrote, "Mom, I got the invitation. I understand why you don't want me there. I'm not angry. I know I made your life harder, and I'm sorry for that. I've been sober for almost 2 years, and I was going to call you to tell you, but then the invitation came, and I realized it didn't change anything. You still don't want me there." And then the last part. Na had to stop and start over 3 times before she could get through it. He wrote, "I just wanted you to know that I tried. I really tried. And I hope the wedding is beautiful. Love, Kieran." That was the whole letter. A 28-year-old man who had done every single thing his mother asked him to do wrote her 6 sentences. He didn't yell at her. He didn't tell her she was a bad mother. He said, "I understand." He said, "I'm not angry." He said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I tried." And he signed it with love. After Na finished reading, she broke all the way open. Deep, heavy sobs that sounded like they were being pulled out of her body. Between them, she said, "He wasn't angry. He should have been angry. Why wasn't he angry?" I didn't answer. There was no answer to give. Kieran looked at what his mother did to him, and he said, "I understand, and I love you." That was who he was. He forgave her. And then he sat alone in his apartment, and whatever had been holding him together for 2 years came apart. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't healing. Sometimes it's the last thing you do before you stop fighting. He forgave her, and he was still alone. And the sobriety that was supposed to earn him a place in her life turned out to be worth nothing. So he drank. Not because he was weak, because he had been carrying something that was never going to get lighter. Na's sobs started to slow. Then she said, "I could have opened this. It was sitting on my dining table for a month. I walked past it every single day. If I had opened it, I would have gotten on that plane. I know I would have. I would have been there." She said it with so much certainty that I believed her, and that made it worse. If she had read those words early enough, she would have gotten on that plane and walked into that ICU room. But she left it on the table. She walked past it every morning and every night, and she chose not to know what was inside. And by the time she finally tore it open, Kieran had been dead for over a month. I said to Na, he wasn't alone when he died. I was with him. I held his hand. He was comfortable. He wasn't in pain at the end. The line was quiet for a few seconds. Then Na whispered so softly I almost missed it. "Thank you. Thank you for being there. Thank you for calling me. Nobody else would have called." We stayed on the phone a little longer, but neither of us said much. Eventually, she said she needed to go, and I said okay, and she hung up. I sat on my couch for a long time after that. Jezebel was right that the knowing gives you a different thing to carry, but it wasn't the same as saying it was bad. The nothing eats you alive. The not knowing, the questions with no answers, the empty space where understanding should be. The knowing is heavy, but at least it's real. At least you can look at it and say, this is what happened. This is who he was. I thought about the dream. Kieran's voice. That's not why I'm calling. 7 nights of waking up in the dark with those words in my ears. But sitting there, I realized I already knew what came after. He wasn't calling about his liver. He wasn't asking me to find the letter or confront his mother. He was calling because someone needed to know he was here. That he walked around on this earth for 28 years and he loved people who couldn't love him back. And he got sober for a mother who didn't want him and he forgave her anyway. He needed someone to know he tried. That he really tried. And the person who needed to know that wasn't Na. She had her own version of Kieran. The messy, painful version she had spent years trying to erase. The person who needed to know was me. I was the one who picked up the phone, in the dream and in real life. I was the one who held his hand when nobody else would and couldn't let go after he was gone. He stayed with me because he needed a witness. I went back to work the next shift, put on my scrubs, clocked in, did my job, filed nothing.